So this is a quick lecture that essentially looks at what are called good manufacturing practices, especially if you're in an industry where you're producing something that is going to be consumed or used by people. This is one of the ways in which you're going to comply with the law and the code of ethics and making sure that you're following certain standards and practices, that you're not going to have bad drugs or bad food or other types of things come out and be consumed and cause harm to individuals. And so on your exam, we're mainly going to look at what is the difference between things such as good manufacturing practices, quality management system, and then SOP and WIDs. Okay, so basically there's a lot of laws that go into this, but generally the good manufacturing practices are the general guidelines for any biotech manufacturing company for anything that you're doing, whether it's chemical production or pharmaceutical production or food production or anything like that sort. These are the mandatory, based upon the laws, um, for your industry. These are the industry standards, basically. And so you can find out about any of your GMPs, again, by the FDA. They're the ones that are making sure that you have quality control as you're going forward. So that's essentially what good manufacturing practices are, is they're guidelines, but they're not specific instructions. They're just general guidelines for your part of your industry. If you're in alcohol production, like brewery, there's certain guidelines for that. If you're in pharmaceutical, there's certain guidelines for that. If you're in restaurant business, guidelines for that. So these are the general, good manufacturing practice guidelines that each specific company is going to have to set up to ensure that whatever product they're doing is going to come out and do no harm to that. Now, so those are the industry standards, right? The FDA says, here's the law, here are the things that you have to do, Code of Federal Regulations. These are your good manufacturing practices. This is essentially what you're complied to do. Now, how you comply with that depends upon the individual companies, and this is what we call quality management system. Quality management system can vary from company to company. You can be two different brewery companies and have different quality management systems, but both in either company are designed to comply with the good manufacturing practices. So this is the industry standard, and this is all the FDA cares about. They don't care what your quality management system is, as long as it ensures that you keep the industry standards. And so this is that trickle-down effect. Here's the law. Here's how you as a company say that you're going to comply with the good manufacturing practices. And this is just to ensure quality, that every time you go out and buy that product, you get the same thing every time. Now, that's a hard thing to do. The reason for that is because there's so much variation. There's so many little things that can change the quality of the drug. You can get bad batches of drug. They're just not made right. The drug isn't exactly as it should. The chemist kind of messed up in that batch. You can get some bacteria that come into that batch of pharmaceutical. And how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that variation? You can, what are the things that your restaurant is going to do to make sure that you're not contaminating the food? Because the industry standard says these are the guidelines, but you say, well, here's what we're going to do to implement that to make sure that we are in compliance with that. So that's what the quality management system is it's company specific to follow the same industry standards that everyone else in your area that you're dealing with biotech or food or medicine or whatever the case may be. So how do you do that? Well, you create SOPs and WIDs. These are basically standard operating procedures, right? And these are workflow ways in which your employees are using. So the management, they know how things are supposed to run, but how do you communicate that to your employees? Because you're not gonna hire someone, someone that is a tech that comes in and does one job. how do you make sure that all the techs are complying with this? You got to create a standard operating procedure, basically a protocol that says, here's what you do. This is your part. This is how you do your part. And so this can be something as simple as hiring a sous chef to make the food in a very particular way, where the restaurant manager is looking at all of the different parts, and each person's going to have their different, thing that they have to take care of. And so this is difficult because ultimately you have to make sure that everyone is doing their part right. And if they're not, that's going to not comply with this, which in turn won't comply with the GMPs, right? And the FDA is essentially going to send people out to restaurants. That's how you get that A rating, or they send them out to the pharmaceuticals or other things, and they check on things. They're like, what are you doing, right? Are you complying with that? They don't care how you do your quality management system or SOPs. They care about this. They care about the protocol, the practice, the good manufacturing practice, industry standards. They don't care about these things. These are what the company and its employees do to make sure that they are getting the same product out every time, that they're not getting people making mistakes. You're training them, you're recording. This is where a lot of times where you have to make sure that any chemicals that you use are cataloged and recorded, because when you get a bad batch, how do you think they go and they know where that lettuce came from in the grocery store that has the E. coli in it? Because they have records. If they didn't have that as a standard, that's a general manufacturing process that you implement down here. If they didn't have the record keeping as a standard, they wouldn't be able to follow where the bad batch of lettuce came from, or the bad batch of this or that came from, or the bad drug came from. Was it a chemical that they were sent, or was it in-house? So that's really why it's so important to make sure that you have these protocols so that the employees, because they don't have a vested interest in the company. They're getting a daily salary. If they mess up and they get fired, it's not a big deal. But if they mess up, that can cause the company to go under, because the FDA comes in and shuts them down. It says, you're not complying with these good manufacturing practices. I don't care what you're doing here. You're not complying with this because your hirelings down here aren't doing their job. And so that's really the flow of quality systems are. GMPs, that's FDA regulated, said, hey, this is your industry, alcohol production, restaurant business, medical, pharmaceutical. This is what you have to comply with. We're going to come in and we're going to check this off for you. Here, I don't care what you do. Just make sure you're complying with this. And so these are going to be the company-specific regulations. And then, of course, down here, this is where you get your employees making sure that they're doing everything that they should.